My draft is missing actually there.
Yeah, there is a lot there. This is completely off. I might have messed up the upload by picking the wrong file during the late update. I'll just try that again. Unfortunately,
Right,
there is no.
So.
Yeah.
And I updated the chair slides with that, so the chair
Oh.
slides are messed up too. But the chair slides you just projected are fine.
Yeah,
So
they
let's
haven't.
leave that, and
I'll
we'll fix
leave
this.
them. Yeah. I just will not hand back control because I just did the updating the slides from the data tracker step, but only after I switched the slides on, so it should be fine here.
Yeah, so we just leave this. All right.
Sorry for the mess up. Yes, that was on me.
Well, we'll have to fix it later because yeah, it's a bit of a mess right now. But anyway. Okay, so go back to it's the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the CBOR working group session at IETF116. Go on to the next slide, Christian. I'm Barry Liba, and Christian Amsus is remote, along with... You're muted.
Fabian is only briefly joining.
Okay, and so let's start with the... we had the note well was up, yeah. So note the note well. You've all seen it before, I'm sure. This is telling you what your responsibilities are when you participate in IETF sessions, what you agreed to, and pointers to all the process documents that are involved. Please take heed of them. Next slide. So for this meeting, as you also probably know by now, being as it's Thursday, please wear your masks unless you're up here like me or talking at the microphone. Please do scan the code that you can no longer see, or launch it from the session, from the agenda. That's our blue sheets, and that's also how you will enter the queue if you have something to say. So please do raise your hand, even if you're in person, do raise your hand in the tools so that we can interleave the remote and local participants both. And that's it. So agenda, we have just done the magic introduction and note well. We're going to be talking about a few, some status of documents that we're not going to be discussing at length today. So we have a couple of those. And then some discussions of other things that are on the agenda. We're going to talk about time tag. We're going to talk about DNS in CBOR, and we're going to talk about CDDL 2.0, which is now a set of documents that Karsten will regale us with. Does anybody have anything that should be added to, removed from, or changed on the agenda? And I see no hands, so we're ready to get started. Christian, do you want to go with the, there's the, now I am seeing the thing that you can scan, but there it is. Okay. Now you have something you can scan to get on the tool. So Christian, do you want to take the brief document status?
Yeah, I can do that. But actually, of those two documents, one will wind up in what Karsten will be talking about. So I'll skip the parts on deterministic CBOR. And other than that, we have only one active working group document in the queue. That is CBOR Pact, on which progress is going on, but coordinating with users such as Coral. And the plan there is to finish up the setup of the dictionaries to finish the table setups in accordance with the requirements of those other documents that needed. And I think that's it as far as these are concerned.
Okay, then let's go with back to the agenda or to the first deck that we're going to look at. There we go.
Do you want to take control?
Yeah, give control to Karsten. Okay, Karsten, you're on.
Yeah, so we have this hole in my slide set that Martinez's presentation will make, but let me try to go through a number of things. One point of information, the usable formal methods proposed research group met for the first time yesterday. And while they are very much interested in protocol analysis and protocol verification, there is also a thread about protocol specification, which of course is exactly what CDDL is. So I think we will try to get a working relationship with this research group going. But that will take time, but I think it will be productive in the long run. I want to talk about profiles quickly, a media type for CBOR diagnostic, the CBOR text document about the time tag. Then Martine will talk about DNS and CBOR, which by the way is the spec that actually is going to contribute the most to CBOR Pact at this point in time, because it's one user of that. And finally, let's talk about CDDL evolution. So let's talk about profiles first. At this IETF, and in particular at the hackathon and before it, I have heard a lot of people coming up and saying, oh, we need a profile for this and we need a profile for that, and so on. And the DCBOR submission essentially also is a profile. And I think we need to spend some quality time on understanding where we need these documents and where we don't. So one of the contributions from the, oh, that's the old slides.
I've refreshed them, but I'll try that again. Sorry.
Yeah, you probably have to unshare and share them again. And then my clicker won't work. And
Yeah, sorry about all of this. I was trying to do some things in the last 10 minutes that was too rushed and we made some mistakes.
yeah, I'm sorry for sending in the update only. But John has a question, so we can use the time. Well,
yeah, this McNally profile, what's the difference between that and what is in the document? I agree very much that deterministic CBOR is needed for security, but I think my feeling was that everything was there. What's lacking is implementations. There's basically no implementation that do deterministic encoding, except like trying to encode it again and see if it's the same, which is very inefficient.
Yeah, Christian, you reshared the slides. Give Karsten slide control back, please.
I just had to do the update properly. I hope I now have the right set. Yep, you're in control again.
yeah, to answer the question, the difference is really not much. So about 90% of what this profile document is about is just explaining things that are in RFC 8949. But there are some decisions they have made. For instance, that the application is not supposed to be able to make a difference between integer and floating point values. And these are valid decisions for a class of applications. So I'm not saying that this profile is in any way wrong, but I think we need to separate the part that just explains things that are explained elsewhere from the actual decisions, like this floating point thing. And there is one more, I forget, some detail, that they have defined, and that essentially influence what the application data model on top of CBOR can be. So you cannot distinguish integers and floating point values with that profile.
Okay, sounds good. I think more focus on deterministic CBOR would be good. Maybe we get some implementations then.
Yeah, okay. I wrote an implementation like 5 years ago, so that's some.
Okay, does it accept deterministic CBOR and fail if it's not deterministic?
Actually, that is not part of the package, but it's 2 lines of code, because you just re-encode what you just got,
Yeah,
and compare it with what you got, and then you know whether it was deterministic.
but that seems quite unoptimal.
Yes, but you cannot really do this much more optimal. So
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the checking, of course, involves looking at all the argument encodings and looking at the map keys. And that, of course, can be done in an integrated way with the actual decoder, which is not the way I implemented it. So for me, this is kind of an optimal implementation. Okay, I just wanted to illustrate the profiles discussion with one image that was created at the hackathon, which explains what the problem might be. Yeah, people are sending around application JSON objects, but some want to put some information somewhere, like in the media type and in a media type parameter and in a profile attribute and in a URN. And so this can get very, very ugly very quickly. So we need to understand how we want to make use of profiles, and maybe invent some concepts like profiles, common usage, whatever. So we only have a few concepts that people can put these things in. Okay, so my proposal would be for one of the next interims to pick up the issue and look at various proposals and extract common characteristics of them. The reason that people are coming with this is an indicator that it's needed. It's just not clear what actually is needed. Okay, so this is my comment on Thomas Fossati's COSI profiles draft as well. Second point, we had a short discussion on the mailing list about having a media type for diagnostic notation. Diagnostic notation is abbreviated as EDN because we are all using the extended diagnostic notation. The original diagnostic notation was defined in 2013 and didn't have things like embedded CBOR and so on. So everybody's using the new one, and we call that diagnostic notation in short. So in 2013, we were very wary of people possibly thinking, this is the interchange format. So you send around CBOR diagnostic notation between your IoT device and its client. And that is, of course, not the intention. So we intentionally did not register a media type for that. But I think 10 years later, CBOR is going to turn 10 in a couple of months. 10 years later, that is no longer really a concern. So we might go ahead with registering something like application/CBOR-diagnostic. And I just added that to the application-specific diagnostic notation literates draft that we already have. And I think that is a document that we could go forward with. Yeah, I'm combining the two decisions here a little bit, but I think it's just convenient to do this in one step. So please do have a look at the draft that I submitted yesterday, I think, and see whether we can go ahead and use the IANA registration in there. When this becomes a working group document, we probably still want to discuss the exact policies we have there, but for now it's good enough for discussion. And yeah, we could do the EDN literals at the same time, or we could do it in a separate document. I don't really want to do hundreds of documents from this working group, so I'm slightly in favor of combining things if it's reasonable. Okay, so that's this. So there is an implicit please call for adoption question in this slide. Just didn't put it on the slide. Time tag. That was a document that we adopted in 2021, almost 2 years ago. This is a document we have no rush completing, or we had no rush completing, because the tags in there were registered from what at the time still was FCFS space, if I remember correctly. So we changed the numbers, the boundaries between the numbers a little bit in 8949, so it no longer would be, but it was registered under the older regime. But there are now documents out there in the security space that want to use this as a more detailed form of time than the usual epoch based seconds since January 1st, 1970. So the working group last call for this document ended in January. One working group last call comment was that there was a CDL in that document only for half its content, so that was completed in a revision. And there were also some minor comments. So -05 was submitted at the Internet Draft deadline. So you are excused if you haven't read it yet. But yeah, that should address the working group last call comments, and the next step will be getting a Shepherd write-up. Of course, you can still comment. I mean, if we find bugs, if we find good places for improvement, we want to use those. But yeah, unless somebody has some comments on -05, I think we should now ship this to the ISG. That's of course for the chairs to decide. One reason we weren't particularly rushing here was that there is a companion document over there in the SEDATE working group that is extending the RFC 3339 internet date type format, resulting in the easy to pronounce XDIF new format, internet extended date type format. And that was blocked on a charter update, but the charter update now seems to go forward, which doesn't mean it's done, but there are certain times we now have to wait for an IETF last call and things like that. But it looks like this will be measured in weeks and not in years. But it's still time to collect comments on this. Okay, now I think we switch to Martin.
I need to turn on sound. Okay. Hi. Yeah, I talk a little about CBOR of DNS messages. So the motivation for this, first of all, is that when we use DNS in constrained networks, specifically DNS over CoAP, we run into the problem that we very quickly run into fragmentation, even if we try to use the normal DNS compression format. And so the DNS-CBOR format was born. And the objective of this draft is to reduce the packet size of DNS queries by encoding DNS messages in CBOR and emit redundant DNS fields in the DNS query, and also provide address and name compression using packed CBOR, which is optional though. And yeah, the changes since last time I presented here in IETF115 is that I addressed some feedback, first of all by Carsten, who is also now a co-author of this draft, by removing the definition of the application DNS-CBOR packed media type, which is now basically just using a parameter for the DNS plus CBOR media type. Then I addressed some feedback from DNS op, namely Ben Schwartz and Vadim Goncharov, by providing some extensibility by making resource records also just being able to be pure byte strings, and also clarifying that the fallback to application DNS message, so the normal wire format of DNS, must always be possible if for some reason encoding in CBOR is not possible, or even if the CBOR format might in some cases be actually larger. Then I did also some mock changes on my own, based on that the queries where like responses are now arrays, and to allow for the inclusion of additional sections, namely the additional authority section. This allows us to also use DNS options in this format. And somehow the slide doesn't progress. I know. Okay. And yeah, I also I added a discussion on the format decisions we used for packed CBOR, and also clarified that the compression algorithm for packed CBOR is up to the implementation. So there is some to be done to provide and compare an example for the compression algorithm, and also address in that way also the comment by Vadim Goncharov, by providing a comparison table between DNS wire format, CBOR, and packed CBOR. And for our next steps, we plan to actually implement a version of this draft, and do an in-depth evaluation of that. And we also want to define some more details, potentially, for example, a global compression context or implied table entries. So yeah, and if you have any thoughts on that, and maybe also additional feedback, it's very welcome. Doesn't seem like it. So I guess we can give back the reins to Carsten.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for look it took me a moment to unmute. I'm just curious. Have people in CBOR looked at the DNS draft? Because I think this would benefit a lot from feedback around here. So yeah, please have a look if you haven't yet.
Second that.
Yeah, and I think we can even promise that if you provide feedback, you will not be made to a co-author, because we now have 5 co-authors and reached the limit, but you still can comment. So just a quick meta comment. I think this is something that is happening a lot at the moment, that we take some legacy format like DNS, extract the data model from that format, represent the data model in CBOR, look at whether that actually brings benefits. And sometimes it does. And that's a nice thing to do. And I think we will do this more often in various places. Okay, so the last, how much time do we have?
Microphone is off. We are 25 minutes after the hour, so.
Okay, so when we can just start the timer of 35 minutes, so I have a rough idea where we are, because
okay.
I'm a no-watch person. Okay, so we had a long discussion about something called CDDL 2.0, which just was a placeholder for things we wanted to do. And now we don't really need that placeholder as much anymore, because we understand what we want to do. So we have a number of documents. This slide is about documents that are pretty much ready for working group adoption, I would say. And some of them really are not about CDDL 2.0 at all, but just doing fixes and additions to what we have in CDDL. So the first one is a small draft, update 8610 grammar. I have no idea why I wrote 8610 and not CDDL. Okay, sorry. Make your life searching things harder. And this fixes three things. It allows empty files, which doesn't make sense for CDDL1, but it's pretty important to get CDDL2 going. So a little bit of shades of CDDL2 are in there. It provides non-literal tags. That was something we didn't understand when we did the original version of CDDL, that people would want to compute with tags, and they now can with this addition. And there are also some errata on 8610, and we took the opportunity to fix those errata. So the main result of all this is that the ABNF changes, and it's good to have all those ABNF changes in one document. So this is this document. This is mostly implemented in various tools, but first of all, you cannot really implement things without thinking about this errata, and people generally came up with the same ideas, so that should go in easily. Empty file, okay, that's a new thing, but it's absolutely trivial to implement. And the non-literal tags, well, that's a little bit more work, because you may have to change an internal API a little bit. But it's also not particularly hard. So I think the legacy CDDL tool does not do non-literal tags yet, while the newer tool does. So that's the implementation status. The second document is one of the documents we have already done once. So we found the need for various control operators. Control operators are the defined extension point for CDDL. And we put a number of them in RFC 9165. So this is kind of part of base CDDL now. And this is just another set. I come to what we added in a minute, but it's really mostly about data formatting. Because, yeah, we often carry things around in our CBOR documents that are encoded in a different way. And it's important to be able to say that. So these are pretty simple, pretty orthogonal. A little bigger is CDDL, what I call CDDL 2.0, which is the module structure. So I believe we can be completely done shipping to ISG with the grammar fixes and the control operators before San Francisco. That might be a little bit harder to achieve with the module structure. The module structure has the advantage that everything that is in the draft is already implemented, so you can play with it, which should make it easy to come up with an opinion. But the assumption would be once people play with it, they will argue for extensions of this. So we will take a few cycles before we say, okay, now we put a lid on it and say this is the module support that we want to have. So this is the program for this year, which doesn't mean we are not going to work on other things, but what we really should have done at least by IETF118 by Prague. And then there are other things which I'm calling CDDL 2.5 now, because we are probably not going to complete them this year. And that is in particular section 3 of the CDDL2 draft, which briefly can be called annotations. So the ability to put additional information into CDDL models that can be used by users of the decoded CDDL data, CBOR data item or JSON data item to trigger some processing. And some of that processing may actually be CDDL processing, and some of that may be application processing. That is, of course, something where you immediately get the whole kitchen sink in the way of proposals that we could do. So we will have to maintain some restraint. But there are examples for that in the freezer document that you might want to look at that. So then there are a few more documents. The freezer document has a common interchange format. It's not a CDDL diagnostic notation, even though it could be called that way, which is essentially just a JSON format for CDDL. This is, you wouldn't want to work in that, but it's great to exchange CDDL between tools in that form. That format has been around for a couple of years. I found that it's probably worth revising this once more. So this will be written up soon. And then we might think whether we want to have that in a document, in a wiki. We can, there's no rush here. The important thing is it's documented in some place where people can refer to it. The second draft is a number of CDDL models for existing RFCs. That helps us because it provides referenceable models we can use in other documents. So if we don't want to reinvent IODEF or something like that, we now have a model for IODEF. There are proposals for having some literals in CDDL, some application-specific literals. So we just talked about diagnostic notation literals, and CDDL is a different language from diagnostic notation, even though they're often confused because they look so similar. The question is, what do we need in terms of application literals? Some of that functionality is actually already provided by the control operators, and we should try to find out, do we need anything there? Let's see. That would be a standard track document if we decide to do something like that. I wrote up a document that describes a way to handle CBOR numbers during specification development. I got a lot of useful feedback for that. I haven't put all of that in yet, so that needs to be done. Of course, this will just be a best current practice, and there will always be people who want to do this differently. But I think it's just good to be able to say to somebody who's writing a new document, why don't you do it like in that document and minimize the friction. And finally, I have written a document to use CDDL for CSV documents, because right now what exists in terms of specifying CSV documents is not so good. There's actually a sizable community out there that is interchanging CSV documents, and my hope is that I'm managing to engage them in some way, but yeah, it's useful as it is. If you have a CSV file that you need to describe, you can do it right now. But I think it will be a time before we adopt something like this. Okay, so that's essentially the overview. The grammar update, we have this angle bracket notation for a tag number that we can use. And so, for instance, in RFC 9277, we couldn't do what the slide does here, and that's, I mean, it's a bug. It's lack of thinking, lack of imagination when we designed this, and this is now filled in. And I talked about the other two items. So yeah, I'm proposing that we adopt this document. Then more controls. This is probably not going to be the final list, but we found that there are a lot of JSON applications that actually could be described in CDL easily, but that need to carry around complex data in base 64 or base 32 or base 45. I didn't find a great description of base 85, or I would have put that in as well. So this just complements the ways we have for encoding things. There is an encoding operator for decimal numbers. So you can describe the number in CDDL and then say, okay, there's a text string that has this decimal number in it. The same thing with JSON values. So you can describe something using CDDL that turns into JSON and carry it around as a text string. There is an operator for building text from an array of components, which is sometimes useful. And finally, the operators we have for general CBOR data items, .CBOR and .CBOR-sec. These need deterministic equivalence, and so the proposal is to add those as well. So if you need something in your spec that would make your life easier, think about it. I'm already thinking about a way to put Yang CBOR encoded data in there. I haven't made a proposal yet, but I'm likely to make one within the next month or so. Okay, this is the second document we could adopt. We don't have to have a complete list at the time of adoption. Of course, we have to have a complete list at the time of working with RAS4. And the third one is the module structure, which essentially allows you to write something like import OID from RFC 1990. And then you don't have to copy over the definition from RFC 1990, but you just get it in there so you can start using it in some other data type definitions. So that should reduce the potential for errors and also enable the generation of something like libraries. So we might at some point simply decide there is a set of useful CDDL definitions that we just put up in a document so people can reference it. Yeah, there are some details to that. So there are two different kinds of usage environments, use cases. One is within a project when you want to structure your data, your specification into multiple files. Then you use an include construct. When you reference CDL from a different project, you use an import construct to make sure that you only actually import what you need, so you don't clutter your CDDL. These import include functions can put the included CDDL into a namespace, and we also optionally can limit the import process to specific names. So all that can be read in the document. It was discussed in detail in the February interim about that. So what is the status? The current feature set is implemented in the CDLC tool. Of course, the CDLC tool is designed to interoperate with other tools like the legacy CDDL tool. So what this does is we want to do a CDL2 conversion towards CDDL, and the input document actually doesn't exist, but it's given in the form of two command line arguments here. So we include RFC 9052 as COSI, and we set the start element to cosi.cosi_key. And we get a little piece of CDL, which I didn't bother to put on the slide. And then we can put this, for instance, in the CDL tool to generate an example. So yeah, the CDL tool is sometimes a little, general in the kind of proposals it makes, but you can use this to understand what COSI key actually would look like. While I'm talking about implementation, there are two features in CDLC that are really useful for tool integration. One is a CDLC can expand generics for you. So if you want to write a tool and don't want to bother with generics, which are essentially hygienic macros, then you can save a couple hundred lines of code because CDLC already does that for you. And CDLC has something called flattening. I have still do not have a full definition from the people who said they need that. But what I have understood, I have implemented, and you can play around with that and see whether it solves your problem. So the main effect is that the specific syntactic positions in the document that might have certain semantic implications actually are mapped to rule names. So you can trigger all your semantics on rule names, while before you also had to trigger on things like map labels and other things. Yeah, so please play around with it. Bug reports are welcome. But I mean, this is an indication that this set is now well understood enough that it can be implemented. And it's not hard. We're talking about a couple hundred lines of code. Okay, any questions on the 2.0?
I'd just like to jump in briefly here, also giving people time to phrase questions. On these three documents and on the EDN literals, I would like to have a very quick round of adoption voices at adoption hand raising at the end of the session. So please make up your minds because I don't want to take too much time of Carsten's clock, and we'll have to fit this in the end still. Back to questions on the first three documents.
You want to do a raise hands thing now, or what?
No, I want to do the raise hands at the end when we kind of have a bit more information on the table. But okay. I want people to know that this is coming and to make up their minds now.
Thank you.
Or start making up an opinion.
This does not take type ahead. Okay, so what is this CDA 2.5? Basically, the idea is to update the processing model and go from a validation-only model. The specification of the data model is an oracle. You throw data at it, and it says yes or no, towards a situation where validating actually adds information to the validated data item. And we already do this with features. So when you validate something that has features in it, you get a list of the features that have been used. And there are command line arguments that tell you certain features are allowed, implied, you don't get them mentioned anymore, and other features are disallowed, so they cause a validation failure. That is interesting, but but it's certainly not everything we need. And the old CDA tool actually has a partial annotator that annotates input items from the model. That partial annotator, unfortunately, is not very good for reasons that are in the platform. So this will be redone at some point in time. These annotations are essentially based on the tool's understanding of your specification. And of course, it would be much better if you could augment the specification or annotate the specification with additional information. And as usual, we don't invent in this working group, we just steal. So RelaxNG actually defines annotations. We might want to learn from the way they did this and what useful things they got done with this. And yeah, then we get an annotated document, and the next step then, of course, would be some form of transformation. But I don't think that will be 2.5. This will be 2.7 or something. So we have to come up with a syntax for annotations. I just put up a straw man up there. I have no idea whether that's a good syntax, but we cannot use the usual bracket syntax that is used in certain programming languages, because brackets mean something in CDDL. This would probably just add name value pairs to the data item. And so you could have the size of a pizza declared. This should be a uint, but it's really hard to type a uint into a tool that always becomes a unit. So the pizza size is an unsigned integer, and it has a default value, which is 35 inches. We have default values in CDL, but these are really weird. So this would be the real thing. Another example would be a co-occurrence constraint. So we have a data structure that has two related data items, and there are some constraints. For instance, the timeout for other session needs to be less than the timeout for session. And right now, there's no way to say this. And with the annotation mechanism, we would have a way to point to that session over there and extract the number. And I come to how to do this in a second. And we might even have transformation specifications. So for instance, this has the number that is in the interchanged item actually has to undergo a scaling transformation by a factor of 10. Yeah.
So we have 12 more minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And
meeting.
I think I have 2 more slides. So the one input to this might be something that has been recently proposed as CBOR path. You may be aware that Yang, which originally was invented to be an XML-based specification, uses XPath for co-occurrence constraints like the one I just had on the slide. We could use XPath 3.1, but it's a bit like all these programming languages that came out of the XML effort. When I started this work, it's some time around 1990, then we decided we are not going to invent our own programming language. We're going to use the scheme programming language as the basis for all extension languages. And this is how DISL was created. And then XSLT was invented with a really weird programming language, which is also very XML-based. So it's hard to use this in non-XML environments. So I wouldn't be a big fan of using XPath. It might be something we resort to if we just don't get our things together. 2007, Stefan Gössner proposed an XPath replacement for JSON that is known as JSON path. That was never standardized, and we set up a working group a couple of years ago to finally do this. And the document is kind of done. and is going into working group last call very, very soon, probably right after the IETF. So that might actually be a basis because the JSON data model, of course, is compatible with a CBOR-1. So yeah, like CDDL, which can do both. And there has been a recent proposal for a CBOR path that I haven't looked at in detail because it came in right before the IETF, but we might learn something from that as well. So my assumption is that we will do something like a CBOR path in the context of the CDL 2.5 co-occurrence constraint activity. And finally, a few steps between 2.0 and 2.5 might be cross-universe references, for instance, pointing to an IANA registry and saying COSI algorithm is the set of all integers that are in the value column of the algorithm's subregistry of the COSI registry. So yeah, maybe we should write SQL there. I don't know. So right now we would have to write this XPath, but IANA is telling us that this is not a stable interface. So maybe by the time we do this, we will have a stable interface. They told me they want to solve this in 2023.
Marco Tiloca, what if the value can be an integer or a string? There are some registries where this is possible.
Yes.
Does it have any impact on the syntax?
Well, this is a strawman, right? So of course you could write int/string.
Simple as that. Okay, thanks.
But the hard part, of course, is converting the textual information that in the end is in the registry into the data model that you want to have. So I was glossing over this here, but of course the value that actually is in the registry is a sequence of digits. And we have to translate this into an integer. Okay, but that would really help getting registries coupled with data models and have data models evolve automatically. And finally, the other thing that I would like to point out is that ABNF is a lot like CDDL. So everything that we wrote here about CDDL module structure and so on, we probably want to do with ABNF as well. Yeah, that's a small matter of standards development. I'm done.
Okay, do we have any questions or discussion about any of this? Okay, I guess not. So we have a few things we need to run through adoption of. First, back on slide 4 here, it is the EDN literals. What's up there is, do we want to adopt the EDN literals draft and just get that through? So is that your plan, Karsten,
yes,
to do that? Does anyone object to taking that path to adopting the EDN literals draft and just pushing that through quickly?
I failed to mention that this is implemented in the CBOR diagnostic.
Yes. So I see no objections. We'll take that and confirm it on the list. Slide 7. So we have,
sorry.
Yep. So we have these three. You're ready to have these adopted, right?
Yes.
Do we have any discussion of these three documents, this update 8610 grammar, CDDL more control, and CDDL modules? Any objections to any discussion of these or objections to adopting them? And I see none, so we'll again take that to the list and make sure that we're ready. Wait, Alexander.
I hesitated a bit, but I just wanted to double check about the difference between import and include, because as a programmer, when I see one of those words, they mean sort of the same thing in my mind. And somebody new coming into this context would they be easily to differentiate what one term means and what the other means? Could
No,
you perhaps
they
elaborate?
will have to learn that,
Uh-huh.
like with most things.
And do you really think this distinction is necessary? What would happen if you only used one term?
The distinction is not necessary. You could get by entirely with import. The problem is that there is a class of errors that you are then likely to make. And it's better if you have these errors caught by using include. So include just pulls in more, and the result is that the internal mechanism in CDDL, in a CDDL processor that compares multiple redefinitions of the same thing and make sure they are all the same. That mechanism is triggered, and you can make sure that the parts of your specification are consistent. And that's why it's good to have something like include. Import will never use a second definition of the same thing. So that's the main difference. And that's why you use include within your own project, where you want to make sure that all the parts that you define in your project actually are consistent. And you use import when you pull something from a library, where you really only want to pull the part that you are interested in.
Thank you.
So one other nice aspect of import is that it's not possible to make a recursion loop, which include doesn't give you.
Okay, so we've got, we'll be posting a couple of messages to the list about the adoptions to confirm that that's good. Chris Lemons, did you want to say anything about your comment yet? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. One of the things I want to make sure to keep in mind when we're looking at modules is the ability to import and or include from documents that are not necessarily RFCs. CDDL is useful for defining structures in a variety of places. And so we want to make sure that that is at least as useful as what we see with like the import from, RFC 9090 or whatever the number is.
Yeah, the current definition cheats a little bit on this. So the thing to the right of an import is a name. And how that name is mapped into something is defined by the tool. So CDLC just takes an environment variable that looks like a Unix path, command line path, and checks whether the file is in one of these positions. And one of the positions, and the last one, is a collection of data that the tool has imported from the RFCs that have been published. So if you are working with a draft, you would make sure that the recent copy of that draft lies around in your file system at a place that you reference in this Unix path, and you would get the right draft. But it's really too hard, we found out, to specify what version exactly you want to have, because if a draft is moving forward and is referencing other drafts and so on, the only real way you can get a specification that doesn't break every time anyone moves is to put those files into a directory on your file system that is constructed in a particular way. And I don't expect that we will be able to do this in the language. But I would love to learn about good ways to do this.
Okay.
This is kind of cheating.
Yeah, I'll continue to read drafts with these thoughts in mind, and we can discuss it as the work progresses. But this is all going in good directions. So, thank you.
Yes. So one thing that I actually do is I rsync the whole set of internet drafts. There are only about 2,000 active drafts, so that's not a big collection. And that is one of the directories that is in the include path.
Okay, we have one more thing we need to deal with before we wrap up. Getting the biweekly meeting schedule going. I've had a chat with Marco to coordinate us with CORE, and we are on the same schedule as we have been, which means that the next meeting will be on the 19th of April, and then we'll go every 2 weeks after that until IETF 117. Does anybody have a problem with that they're aware of right now? And seeing nobody jumping up, we will again confirm that on the list. So be looking out for a message on that and check your calendars. And with that, we're at the top of the hour. Christian, anything from you?
No, just a thanks for everyone for presenting and participating.
Yes, thanks. And Christian, thanks for sorting out things while I was having Meetup problems. That was quite weird. So thanks everybody for coming, and we will see you on the 19th of April online and on the mailing list.